So now we come to session 5 of the spirituality course, and today we're looking at life and death. Today we're going to look at the stories of 4 different people who had near-death experiences and see what we can learn from them. But first we need to understand more about what a near-death experience actually is. It's an experience which starts shortly before a person dies but continues after that person is clinically dead. So these people who receive near-death experiences actually do die. Their hearts stop beating. But this experience can be confused, as people sometimes think that an out-of-body experience is a near-death experience. An out-of-body experience is much more common, and it's where somebody's soul leaves their physical body and they have an experience of being outside of themselves. A near-death experience can also be confused with a hallucination, where people see things which are not really there. So let's look in a bit more detail about what those things are. An out-of-body experience is a sensation of being outside your own body. People normally feel like they're floating and observing the situation around them from a distance, particularly from above. They're very aware of what's happening, but they're no longer able to interact with their surroundings. A hallucination, on the other hand, is an illusion of seeing things or experiencing things which are not actually real. The person is creating a separate reality, and that reality is happening inside their own mind. These experiences can be brought on by a number of things. The most basic reason for a hallucination could be a dream. People can also start to hallucinate if they're dehydrated or if they're unwell. Infections or a high temperature can bring about hallucinations. I remember that my mother suffered from very scary hallucinations when she had a severe infection. People can also hallucinate when they're suffering from mental illness. I had a friend who was bipolar, and if he was having an episode, he thought he was being watched on the TV or that people were following him wherever he went. Drugs can also bring on hallucinations. Both legal and illegal drugs can have this effect. I know when people are given morphine to deal with pain, they often have very vivid hallucinations. And there are plenty of illegal mind-altering drugs like LSD or ecstasy. But even antidepressants can cause hallucinations if someone takes too much. Do you know anyone who's had an out-of-body experience or a hallucination? Perhaps you'd like to pause the video and discuss that with your group now. Thinking a little further about out-of-body experiences, these do tend to be deeply spiritual experiences. In the case of a severe accident, an out-of-body experience can happen then. And as we'll see as we go through our session today, near-death experiences normally include an out-of-body experience. So let's take a look at an example now by looking at Nancy's story.
It was January 3rd of 2014. I'll never forget that morning. It was a beautiful sunny day. I decided to go out on a bike ride. I needed to do some errands around town. There was a little voice inside of me that just said to not go out riding that day. I don't know where that came from, but I ignored it. I got about a mile, well, not quite a mile from my home, and I could see some traffic coming in on the right. At the very last minute, I realized that first car wasn't going to stop. I knew in a flash that I was going to die right there. It was a woman driving a big SUV, and she hit me broadside. I put my hand out like this to try to veer off my bike the other direction. I ended up flipping onto the top of her hood and looked in. I think she was so focused on her phone that she didn't know that she had hit anything or anyone. So I ended up pinned between her vehicle and the road as she drove. As my shoulder hit the pavement and my body hit the pavement, I had an interesting thing happen. I had what I call a sense of dual consciousness. Me underneath the vehicle, being dragged under this vehicle. But at the same time, I saw the whole accident unfold from a position of 50 to 75 feet outside of everything. I see myself laying under the vehicle in pain, in screaming. I saw a woman struggling to hang on to life.
Nancy Rhines wrote about her story in her book, Awakenings from the Light, 12 Life Lessons from a Near-Death Experience. Welcome, Nancy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
So that moment you described as dual consciousness, was your heart still beating? Were you still alive in that moment?
I was still alive in that moment. That's why it really kind of freaked me out a little bit. I hadn't had any, I had never felt anything like that before. There was nothing in my lexicon to describe what this was, but I was still alive, yes.
And it was unfortunately, it was only a preview of what was to come.
Right.
Because 3 days later, you had a major surgery.
Right.
And what happened?
So during the surgery, my heart rate stopped for a brief time, and my breathing went to zero. My blood pressure dropped precipitously. And it was in that moment that I found myself waking up. And I thought, wow, this is great, because around me was this beautiful hillside surrounded by flowers and trees and a beautiful mountain range in the distance. And a sense of peace and love and welcoming that I had never felt before. And I knew something was different.
And like with Sherry, it wasn't panic, it wasn't fear,
No.
It wasn't scary.
No, not at all. No, I felt a little confused at first, and then I thought to myself, I must have died. I wonder if I died. But then if I did, why am I here? Because I don't believe in any of this.
Right, I'm an atheist. What's happening? Could it be I was wrong?
Exactly.
And what about that? Because you came back.
Right.
And what information did you take away from that? What lesson?
Well, I was welcomed in to heaven, what I call heaven, immediately. When I had that thought of, I wonder if I died, and if I did, why am I here? There was a welcoming voice that said, because you are my child. This is your home. Welcome home.
Was there hesitation about returning back
For
here?
me, yes.
Like you might have just stayed there.
There was a part of me that really wanted to stay because of the peace and the love. The love was incredible, and the connection to everyone and everything was incredible.
So we see that Nancy had an out-of-body experience while she was still alive, but very seriously injured. She could see herself underneath the car being dragged along, but when she actually did die, a couple of days later during surgery, she had a different experience. That time the experience was of being taken to a place like a beautiful garden. She became aware that she was dead. Internally, she was aware of who she was and where she was, but she just couldn't make sense of it all. She had an overwhelming sense of love and belonging. And she understood that she was home. She was where she was meant to be. But the one obvious question, which often crops up as people look at near-death experiences, is can we trust them? How do we know that these stories aren't just made up? Well, although each story is different, there are similarities between them. And also people become quite emotional as they recount these stories, even many years after they've happened. And they also report that they've changed as a result of their experience. Some things to be aware of, though, are that a person's interpretation of what happened will affect the way in which they tell the story. It will colour the language and the descriptions that they use. And this can give us a picture of their interpretation of the story rather than exactly what they saw or experienced. And over time, these stories can become distorted or even embellished. I'm sure we can all think of someone who loves to tell a good story about what's happened to them. And each time we hear them recount it, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more exciting, perhaps. So over time, the story of this near-death experience may become less like the original event. And to add to that, many people then go on to give interviews and write books, and those things rely on a really good story. So all of those things aside, I do believe that NDEs are a real thing and that they are real experiences of the afterlife. It's just that we must keep a clear mind and try and work out what was the original experience and what's their interpretation, or what have they added for effect. So we're going to move on now and look at 3 different people's experiences. They are the stories of Betty, Jessie and Penny, and we're also going to see the analysis of those NDEs by a doctor called Jeffrey Long. So let's first look at Betty's story.
I went in for a routine hysterectomy, and it was during or after the hysterectomy that I actually experienced my death. I was out of recovery and in my private room when I awoke at about 9:30 in the evening. I didn't feel any pain. It was just this feeling as though every last drop of blood had drained from my body. And I tried to reach for the nurse, but I was too weak to reach the little buzzer that they had placed by the side of my bed. I then felt this sensation coming up from my feet, a numbing type thing. And then all of a sudden, I felt a movement in my chest. And then there was a sound like a pop. My spirit came up out of my body in a very tremendous speed, and I could look down and see my body laying on the bed.
While no 2 near-death experiences are the same, those of us that research them see a very consistent pattern of elements. Very often there's that life-threatening event. The person's nearly dead, they're unconscious, or they may not even have a heartbeat. At that time, they have what's called an out-of-body experience. Consciousness separates from the body and typically goes above the body. They may then go into or through a tunnel. They often see a mystical, unearthly, brilliant light at the end of the tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, they may enter an unearthly, beautiful realm. They may see their deceased relatives at loving reunions, even deceased pets. By this time, they're typically feeling overwhelming positive emotions. They really feel like this realm that seems unearthly to us is really their home. We've had people blind from birth that have highly visual near-death experiences, and that's medically inexplicable. We have near-death experiences that occur under general anesthesia, and that should be, if you will, doubly impossible to have your heart stop while you're under anesthesia, and yet there are typical near-death experiences. In addition to that, when you think about it, when you have a cardiac arrest or your heart stops beating, instantly blood stops flowing to the brain. 10 to 20 seconds after that, the electroencephalogram, or EEG, a measure of brain electrical activity, goes absolutely flat. It should be impossible to have any kind of a conscious experience, and yet by the hundreds, people report near-death experiences.
So here are some of the typical things that people experience when they have a near-death experience. When they're close to death, they have an out-of-body experience. They can observe themselves and those who are around them. Then when their heart stops and they die, that experience changes, and they often see a light or experience being drawn towards a light through a tunnel. They often experience a beautiful garden or a lovely view of mountains and nature. And they see deceased family members or friends, and they can communicate with them. They also experience feelings of love, peace and joy, and have a sense that they've come home. It's an overwhelmingly positive experience. To understand this a bit more, the doctor mentioned how it could not be the person's brain that was creating these experiences, because blood had stopped travelling to the brain. And also they could see on the medical equipment that no brain activity was happening. These were experiences of the person's soul. He also mentioned that even when someone was under general anaesthetic they had these experiences, which was totally unexplainable. If you can recall this diagram from our session on dreams, it shows three things: internal awareness, connectedness, and wakefulness. And on the left-hand side, there are 7 levels of internal awareness, and the NDE is at levels 5 and 6. And we can see from this graph that when somebody has a near-death experience, they're very internally aware. However, they are completely disconnected from the world around them. Their internal reality completely changes. As far as those people around them are concerned, their body's dead. They're unresponsive. However, they are actually very much alive, but experiencing a different reality, a spiritual reality. So let's continue now and see a little bit more of Betty's experience.
When I came down and looked at my physical body lying on the bed, then I knew that I had died, and I thought, oh my God, I'm dead. I don't know how I died, but I'm dead. Then suddenly appearing by the side of my bed were 3 ancient-looking men, ancient in that they were old, but they were beyond old. And they explained to me that I had prematurely died. I wanted so much to see my family. So I went out the window and I traveled to my home. My husband was sitting in a chair reading a newspaper. So I went over and stood by him. I felt concerned that he didn't know I had died, and neither did my children, and I worried about them. I worried how their life would be should I not be there for them. And as I wondered about that, I could see each child. I just saw each phase of their life, and that their lives would be fine even without me. So I felt content, as any mother would, that, you know what, they're going to be okay. Then I went back, traveled quickly back to the hospital bed, and was drawn into this immense tunnel. There was sound, there was music, there were chimes. It was extremely relaxing, very comfortable. And I went through the tunnel, into the tunnel, and traveled into this black space. Then suddenly I saw a form at the very end of the light. And as I approached the light, I could see the figure moving with arms spread out like this, and he was Jesus Christ. And I reached for him and put my arms around him as he held me too. And he said, "It's not yet your time. It's not yet your time." Some angels or guardians or guards or supporters of him and me came. There were 3 women, and he said, "Show her everything that she needs to know." Then they took me to a garden, and they said for me to be there, to stay here, enjoy yourself. I went through the garden and walked, and it was beautiful beyond any description. You just simply can't even imagine the colors and the beauty, the flowers of every kind and other kinds that we don't even have here. This is when I learned that I wouldn't remember a great deal of what was going on. I called these men warring angels, in that they came into the garden and they said, "Are you ready for more?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And they took me, and it was like a freedom of flight. It's like we just rose up into the air and we just went.
So we see with Betty's experience that some things are quite typical of a near-death experience and other things are not. We see that when she had her out-of-body experience, she was aware, when she looked down at herself, that she was dead. But then, rather than seeing a light and angels, she saw some old men who explained to her what had happened. She also went and managed to see her own family, and she was given the information that her family would be okay. And then she experienced this tunnel, and in this tunnel there was sound and there was light, and it was a comfortable space. And eventually she came out of the tunnel and saw a figure, and she recognized that person as Jesus. Now, as we go through these different stories, you'll see that some people experience seeing family members, others see friends, others see Jesus, and others experience God. People don't all report seeing or experiencing the same thing. Betty then said that angels showed her this beautiful garden and then took her to see other things. But she was aware that she wouldn't remember a lot of what she'd seen. We're now going to look at another experience of a lady called Jessie. Let's look at her video.
I didn't have enough blood in my system to really put me back into a surgery. So I started receiving antibiotics. I had blood transfusions. It was probably between like 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And when I slept, there was no way I ever could escape the pain. But I'm staring at the wall, and it was like, the best way I can describe it is that my eyes opened, and then they opened again. And when they opened again, I was in this endless, misty, white room. It was like just this space. And the very first thing that I realized was that I was able to stand up straight, which is something that I hadn't been able to do since the surgery. And I was astonished at how perfect I felt. No pain. I felt like the perfect version of myself. And so that really stuck with me. And in the distance, I saw somebody kind of waiting. And I immediately, even though I didn't see this person at first, I immediately recognized who it was. And it was one of my best friends named Anthony, who had died about 2 years before. And I was just so happy to see him. I wanted to run up to him. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him how much everybody missed him. And then I realized that this was about me. This wasn't some joyous reunion, that something serious was happening. And then behind Anthony and to my right, the light started to appear. And that's when I realized that this was death. This was my death. And Anthony was there to take me home. The light started off as this shimmer, and then it grew. There's no way you can describe it. It is the most profound, most unconditional love. And the light is everything that ever was and ever will be. I instantly felt connected to the entire universe. I kind of was presented a choice. I had something called a life review, where I was shown the impact that I had during my life on the world around me. It wasn't judgmental, it was more subjective. It was, this is the energy that you put into the world during your life, and I love you. I'm part of you.
So we see with Jessie's near-death experience that there are some significant differences, but there are also a number of similarities. Jessie didn't have a typical out-of-body experience. She said it was like she opened her eyes and then she opened her eyes again and she was in a different reality. She was in a misty white space and she could sense in her own body that she was the perfect version of herself. She didn't have any pain. She could stand up straight. And then she saw her friend. And then her friend, as she understood it, was there to help her make the transition to death. And then she saw this light appear, and it was only at that point that she realised she was dead. But then she felt this unconditional love, and she felt totally connected, as she put it, to the whole universe. She then had a life review and saw the things that she'd done in her life and how they affected others. And we're going to look at this in a bit more detail later.
So at my checkup, I asked my surgeon, I said, I saw a light while I was in the hospital, and I was really careful. And he said, oh, I've heard of that happening to people, but I've never had a patient tell me that. And I said, well, how close was I? and he said, "Jessie, you were walking the line there for a while."
It was later, 5 years later, that I went to my doctor and I said, something happened to me. I need to discuss it with you, and I want to know if you had any idea that I died. And he said, yes, I was aware of that.
Following a near-death experience, as you can imagine, it's generally very life transformative. People that have a near-death experience, of course, almost uniformly don't fear death. From their perspective, they know what lies beyond death's door, and they know that it's wonderful. Of course, they have an increased belief in afterlife for exactly the same reason, but their values also change. They tend to become less materialistic, more loving. They may change professions, or they may change relationships if they can't express their new values.
When I started to kind of, I guess, rejoin the world, I felt this intense love for everyone. Not that I was necessarily a selfish person beforehand, but this new feeling was that I cared about everybody I saw. I have no fear of dying. Not that I ever really considered death before, but I could die right now and I would be perfectly okay with that.
We can see that people who go through near-death experiences are transformed by that event. Often they no longer fear death because they know that they're going to be in a place of love and acceptance. And because they often see family members, that gives them comfort when a loved one faces death. And their values and beliefs can also change. They tend to become less materialistic and more loving. It's as though the love that they experienced transforms them. They also realise the importance of relationships and treating other people well. And finally, and very significantly, they end up believing in God and in the whole spiritual world. They become more spiritually aware because they know that there's something out there far more than the physical world that they can see. So let's see the second half of Jessie's story.
I was shown how my death would impact my family. So I was shown my 2 children, who at the time were 5 and 2 years old. I was shown what their grief would be like. I was shown how that would impact them throughout their life, that they would miss me, but that they would be okay, that their life would thrive. Another person that really stood out was my husband's grief. That grief was, I felt it. I felt his grief like it was mine. It was really intense. I wanted to float down to my husband's body, which I could see sleeping on the fold-out couch. I wanted to tell him that everything would be okay. Anthony kind of squeezed my shoulder lovingly and he smiled at me like I had answered some unspoken question. And then Anthony and the light both started going this way, and I started falling backwards into my body. Going back into my body hurt. Leaving my body did not. It was like jumping into an ice-cold pool after being in a sauna. It's hard for me to say it was a miraculous healing, but I suddenly started expelling all the blood that had been pooling in my abdominal cavity. I expelled over 2 liters of blood and 800 cc's of fist-sized clots. It scared the entire nursing staff. It scared my family. I mean, it's scary when you see that much blood coming out of a person. But what was odd was that my vitals were improving. I was actually stabilizing, not getting worse. The doctors still don't know what caused my illness to begin with, why my symptoms were happening, exactly where I was bleeding from internally, nor do they know really how I healed from all of that.
So we see with Jessie that she also saw her family during that near-death experience, and she saw how her death would affect them. She experienced their grief, and because of that, she wanted to go back and comfort them. And it was at that point that it seemed she had a choice, and she returned to her body. And that return wasn't easy. She experienced pain, but she also experienced miraculous healing. She lost a huge amount of blood, and in spite of that, her vital signs started to improve to the shock of all the medical staff around her. So we're going to check out another video now, and this is the story of Penny.
It just started out kind of out of nowhere, and I was having some autoimmune type things like fibromyalgia and rosacea in my cheeks and stuff, but I mean, a lot of women have that. And I was home with my daughter one day and drinking just a smoothie in the living room, and I had a history of anaphylaxis to shellfish, but I hadn't had an attack in years and years. I just kind of kept those EpiPens around obligatory, because you're supposed to, but I'd never used one. I'm in the living room and I start having difficulty breathing and swallowing, and I'm a nurse, and I was like, holy cow, this is anaphylaxis. So I gave myself my EpiPen. My son drove me to the hospital, and it was a small town we were in, and I knew the nurse who was checking me in, and I won't say her name, but when she was checking me in, I thought, oh man, I'm in trouble. She's got no idea what she's doing. And she said, well, why did you come? You took your EpiPen. What'd you come to the hospital for? And I thought, wow, you don't even know the basic protocol for anaphylaxis. You take your EpiPen, you go to the hospital. So she's like, we're waiting on a bed for one of the rooms, so I'm just going to set you here in the hallway. We'll get to you soon. And that's a person that goes, I'm a critical care nurse. That person goes right to the trauma bay because you may end up having to intubate. So I'm in the hallway. I've got Strider, which is, and people are just walking around doing their thing. I'm dying. Give myself another shot of my EpiPen. And finally the PA looks over and is like, she's not looking so hot. They get me in a room, and at this point we don't have an IV or anything. And I'm crashing fast. Don gets there and they move me into trauma, and they can't get an IV because when you have anaphylaxis, everything kind of clamps down. And so it's just going from bad to worse. And Don's like, if you don't do something, she's going to die. You need to intubate her. They said, oh no, we've got plenty of time. And it was immediately after that I just quit breathing. And it's funny because I popped out of my body so I could see what was going on. And so I'm kind of watching and I'm thinking, man, who is that girl? She's pretty sick. I was so depersonalized. I didn't realize that was me. So they intubated me, and then everything was just black for a while. The next thing I remember, I kind of materialized in the back seat of my sister's car, and she was driving from Wisconsin to Kentucky, and she was at this gas station. She had pulled over and it was pouring rain, and I knew my body felt weird, like not solid, and I couldn't feel my bottom and my legs against the seat, and that seemed odd, and I just couldn't sort out what was going on. So I'm in the back seat of her car and I see her clothes and they don't match, and I'm thinking, what on earth is she wearing? She looks ridiculous. And I sensed something was wrong. Why is she driving in this pouring rain? She should be home. Maybe something's happened with one of the kids. And I saw her pull her phone out. She got onto Facebook and she typed, hang on, or hang in there, kiddo, I'm coming. And then I popped back out of her car and I was just in this dark void. I was in this expanse that was so dark, and it seemed limitless to me as far as its space. And there was an oppressive nature to it. And I wonder if some of that being on the ventilator and the agitation that occurs in a patient, even in a coma from being on a ventilator, I wonder if I was kind of feeling that on that side, because as a nurse, it seems to me what people would describe. And so I had this just oppressive work of breathing, and it was like I knew I didn't need to breathe over there, but it still seemed like I had to perform the work. And I was just stuck there. I couldn't figure out how to get out. And time is really different there. Time here is so structured, and time there really gets away from you. And so I always tell people, if I had to compare this earthly time with the time that I spent in the void, I would say it was probably about 10 years. I began to wonder if I had ever really lived, Like maybe I just imagined all of that to have something to think about in that place. I just didn't know what was going on, why I was trapped there, what I could do to get out. I would try to move and I'd drag myself forward a little bit, and then I'd get so tired and go into what I call the deep sleep, where I had no awareness. And that kind of went back and forth for a long time. And then finally, I started doing some introspection and saying, you know, is there something that I need to understand or learn before I can leave here, or realize, you know, maybe I did live that life and there's something maybe it's me, maybe I'm why I'm stuck here. And it just occurred to me that the spiritual space that I was in was a picture of the spiritual space that I had made on the earth realm. I had kind of, since my divorce many years ago, I had kind of built this wall around myself to protect me and protect the kids. And, you know, a wall's great to protect you, but it also keeps people out and it keeps you in. And so I'd really started to isolate. You know, I mean, I went to work, I took care of my kids, I took care of my house, I went to work, I took care of my kids, I took care of my house, and I stopped putting myself out there. And so the isolation that I had built on this side followed me over. As soon as I figured out that this was the eternity that I had created, as soon as that realization happened, there was this rumbling and it exploded open. And so now all these little pieces of the darkness, like almost shards, are flying. They're just spinning around.
So Penny here has quite a different experience. When she had her out-of-body experience and looked down on her body, she didn't even realise it was her. She was fully aware of her surroundings, but couldn't make any sense of them. And after she died, she then found herself in her sister's car, who was rushing to the hospital to see her. She could see her sister, she could see the surroundings, but she was completely confused by the experience and was asking herself lots of questions. But she still didn't actually realise that she was dead. It's interesting to notice that each of these people get to see those people that they love most directly after they die, but before they transition to the spiritual realm. So what do you think about that experience? Does any of that resonate to you? Penny then finds herself in this dark, oppressive void. And she said she felt trapped. She felt that when she was in that place, time passed really, really slowly. It felt like she was there for years. And she kept asking questions like, why am I here? And then she had this realization that potentially this experience that she was having reflected her own life experience. Effectively, she created this space that she was in. She had separated herself from everyone else. And so now she found herself in this position of isolation.
And I was just floating in this light and I didn't realize she had gone. And all of a sudden there was this like rumbling, thundering, and like this presence shook everything that ever had been or ever would be. Every planet in the cosmos just was rumbling with this energy, and I could feel it in my bones. And I knew something big was coming. And I never saw a person, and I always refer to God as He, just because the energy felt very masculine to me. But I mean, I can't say with certainty that this was a man, and I don't think God is a man. I think it's, I don't know, He was this mix of masculine and feminine because He was nurturing, but that power makes you think, you know, at least me as a traditional person, it makes me think of a man. You know, He came to me and I heard Him say this telepathic thing. He said, I am. And that was it. That's all He had to say. I'm like, man, you're the stuff. You just come up to somebody and say, I am. And you're like, yeah, you are. There's a resonance, and it's the key of D is what it sounded like to me. And no, it's hard to talk about. It just had this vibration to it that was alive, that just went through me. And I could feel it just coursing through every part of me. And so I'm there with him, and immediately I got kind of scared. I'm like, oh no, I wasn't ready for this. He's going to look at all the stuff that I've done wrong, that I'm so ashamed of. And he wasn't judging me. He was like super loving and everything. But I just, it was like being naked in front of a crowd. I just was wanting to kind of hide. And he kind of soothed me in that. And I knew we were going to go through my life. And so here I'm dreading stuff like a kid, worried about the parents reading their diary or something. And all those things that I was so worried about, that I was dreading, never came up. What the heck, right? I think I had probably beat myself up enough about those. And so these other things came up. And first he showed me the good. And all of the things that I've done that I feel really good about did not come up. And the things that came up were, there was a scene in the grocery store that I had forgotten about. I mean, probably when my kids were little. There was a woman in line in front of me, and she was short just a couple dollars to pay her bill. And she was trying to figure out what to put back. And I just knew what it was like to be in that position as a young mom. And I said, it's okay, I've got it. And I gave her the money. And it immediately, so I'm seeing this scene like I'm there, and immediately it flashes forward, and I see this woman working in a food pantry, and she's blessing these people with food. And God's showing me, he's like, I want you to see the ripple effect of every little act of kindness. And I saw that, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then we went through some of the negative things. And the one thing that really stuck with me was that of all the things I've done in my life that I'm not proud of, the thing that was shown to me is probably the hardest thing to never do again. And it was to control my thoughts about other people. And God showed me, he said, let me explain something to you. So a thought has a certain measure of energy to it. And a word has even more, and an action has more than that. But it all starts with a thought. What you think about is what you talk about, is what you end up doing. And so it starts here. You got to control your thoughts and your heart.
So as we continue through Penny's story, we see her bursting out of this void. The dark void effectively shatters as she realizes why it's there. She then experiences this incredible rumbling and vibration which went right through her body. And she said she just knew it was God. And then God spoke, and he said, I am. And interestingly, that's exactly how he describes himself in the Bible. And she was also given a life review. She saw how acts of kindness that she'd carried out had a ripple effect on those around her. But in Penny's life review, she also was shown some negative things. And one of the most important things was the importance of controlling her thoughts towards other people. She highlighted the fact that our thoughts become our words, become our actions. And so if we control our thoughts, ultimately we will be much better people, because what we say and what we do will flow from those thoughts. So finally, to conclude, we can see that these near-death experiences bring about transformation in those who have them. Because people have this life review, they fully understand how their actions affect others. And then when they return, they come back with a totally different mindset. They have a desire to restore relationships which have been broken. And they themselves are so transformed by love and compassion that they can act in a totally different way towards other people. Their natural response to people is of love and compassion rather than judgment and impatience. And it's interesting to note that those who study near-death experiences say that actually just looking at other people's experiences can also have a positive effect on our own attitudes to other people. So that concludes our session for today. Next time we're going to continue to explore life and death by looking at a few more near-death experiences.